I would always close sometimes multi-million dollar contracts. My minimum engagement was about $120,000. I was at a charity event and someone walked up to me and said, "Can I take a picture with you? I've been listening to your podcast and I'm just such a fan." I don't think Buzzsprout and some of those other companies in the industry have a better product than us.
This is the Content Capitalists Podcast. We talk to business owners who've used video to grow their businesses to $1 million a year or more. How they did it, what worked, what didn't. Welcome to the Content Capitalists with your host, Ken Okazaki.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Content Capitalist Podcast, where I have conversations with people who are creating content and crushing it at their game, meaning they're doing at least $1 million, many times a lot more in their businesses. Now, I have with me somebody whose game is actually about content creation, specifically mastering podcasts. Now, if you don't know who she is already, I'll give you a hint. She started something called Podetize and a whole lot of other things. And I'm just checking out her page here, and I'm going to let her speak. Don't worry. Her tagline is amazing. Right at the top, it says, binge-worthy, tactic-packed, covertly feminine. I mean, how cool is that? Tracy, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us here.
That makes it sound like I'm covertly feminine, but that was actually how I used to design. So I would design products for mass market retail, and we would design things that women loved because women buy most of the
Women
products
are the
that are out there,
buyers.
most of the service, right? Yeah. And so, but you didn't want to make it like pink. So that was kind of my thing. So that's still in my general tagline about my person.
I like that. Now, I'm going to be referencing your page a few times because I saw some really interesting numbers there, and I want to dig into that. But before we do, I want the audience to understand, just kind of get it, if they haven't heard of you yet, which they probably have, if they've researched anything to do with podcasting. Could you give us a 30,000 foot view of a few things you've done that people might recognize, and then like what kind of people do you serve?
So I have 6 podcasts that are still live today. So we started one about a decade ago, about 9 years ago, on 3D printing. And people would say, "What is this that you're doing on 3D printing? And how do you have 100,000 listeners a month?" And then when I would tell them, they would be like, "Here's my credit card. Will you do it for me?" And so within a couple of years, we started a company called Podetize. And it's just been a whirlwind of helping people understand how to professionally use podcasting in your business. This is not for entertainers, it's not for even social media influencers who think that they want to dabble in podcasting. It's not the same thing as using podcasting within your business, and that's our sole focus. And so we have a lot of fun with it. I wrote a column for Inc. magazine for 4 years because they heard me on a podcast and heard me give a speech. So, the podcasting can and will do all kinds of authority building for you. And that's really our focus.
Amazing. Now, I want to make one distinction here. Like what you said right there. It's not for the influencers, it's not for the people who want to dabble. It's actually for people who have, legit businesses, and they're looking for another way to, attract the right kind of people. I love that because a lot of people they have this kind of fuzzy line between influencer, YouTuber slash, business owner who is also a content creator. So let's dig into that a little bit further. Now, one of the things that stood out to me, and I'm looking at your page here again, is 1 million listeners, really, really awesome. 89 million readers, number 22 in the CIO rating. Now, as I'm scrolling down, this number jumped out at me because I'm right now in the process of patenting an invention. 41 patents. Tell me just a smidge about that, because, and this is for my own personal gratification. There might be some people in the audience who are interested in that. What are you patenting?
So my original business is design. So for 30 years, I've designed products that you buy every day at mass market retail around the world. So not just in the US and Japan and Australia and Canada and the UK. So all kinds of products all over the world. And so because I started out in product design, the majority of our patents, and those are patents shared between my partner and I because we design together. And things like furniture mechanisms. I think there might even be a couple of software systems in there too. And of course, there are some things that relate to podcasting in there as well. There's a microphone design that's pending. And so there's some other things in there too. But we mainly believe in using patents, just kind of like we talked about podcasting, using them as a strategic move in your business.
Mm.
How can
So you're
I
not
both?
necessarily building, manufacturing, and selling these. These are you own the IP, and other people can either lease them, buy them, or
Yeah, I mean, the reason why our patents are so successful are because they're in use, right? So we don't patent things that we don't believe already have a market. So either we've tested it out, built the market ourselves, and then we patent them, or our clients hired us and the patents developed out of that work with them. And so they're using them, they're in use. And that's, we call that commercialization. So out of our 40 patents, we have an 86 commercialization rate, 86%. And that means that the majority of them are being bought and sold today. And that makes a big difference. I don't believe in patenting as like, something you hang on your wall and, you should be, oh, I have a
right,
patent. I
right,
don't, that's
just something to
nothing.
brag
That's a
about.
piece of paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to put them in use.
There was a book I read. Now I'm promising my listeners we're going to get to content creation because that's what this is about. But this is kind of interesting. I can't remember who it was, but there was a book I read probably 8, 9 years ago, and he said that Tim Ferriss actually came to his workshop and he was teaching about how to create patents and lease them out to different companies, without ever having to inventing things, but never actually producing and selling it. Now, would you happen to remember the name of that book? Because I realize I should probably go
I
dust that off.
don't, and actually, I think that's disingenuous, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I think that in the world that I have worked in for 30 years, that unless you prove the market, you have no licensability at all. So for them to say, "Oh, you don't have to do any work." No, they had to do work. But they may not have actually physically made the product. They have to have proven that this is valuable to a market. So there is either marketing work or manufacturing work. You got to do one or the other. You can't just throw something up on a piece of paper and go, "Oh yeah, this is good. I can license this." It never works like that.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Let's actually talk about content and stuff. Now, by the way, you have a very smooth, soothing voice. And I don't know why you said like earlier, like, oh, watch out, because I talk super loud. No, it's really cool. And that's probably one reason people well,
It's
I
a good
was once
microphone, number
it's a
1,
good
right?
microphone, yes. I was interviewing someone who had, who's actually in a professional studio. And it was actually a little bit painful to my ears to listen to their voice. And I was thinking to myself, we need to get you some voice coaching or something. I don't know, even know if that stuff exists. But the story was good enough that it actually carried over. And I think, that was actually quite a popular show.
Yeah, I'm proud of like those people that are out there in studios and doing other things because there's somebody there who can assist them, who can help them understand what does that sound like? Is that coming out well on the other end? My voice tends to resonate. It's loud. And so if you're don't have your levels going right and the studio can help with that, or you don't have a system that can level things, it doesn't really work out really well. And so that's why I do warn people, because a lot of people don't have good tools. You obviously do.
I kind of have to because I'm Japanese. We just have to geek out and buy technology. It's a genetic condition called being Japanese. We
Oh,
buy technology.
there's plenty of tech files around the world, so you don't have to worry about that. I love tech too.
I think that you and I could geek out on a lot of things. Now, one thing I noticed on your page, you said 1 million listeners. That's super impressive. Now, for somebody listening who's just getting started, like me, or somebody who's thinking about getting started, that might sound intimidating. So I'd like you to do everybody a favor and take us way back to before you even started your first business. What was that? Were you in corporate, just out of school? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I have been in corporate before. I worked for a couple of very large design sensitive organizations. You may have heard of them, Herman Miller. They invented the Aeron chair, and I was working on that project early on before it came out publicly. Milliken and Company, one of the largest textile manufacturers in the world. So I worked in house in a couple of those companies. But for the most part, I've worked out on my own with my partner, who is my husband. And the two of us design together all the time, but we design for large brands like Martha Stewart Living, like Costco, like Better Homes and Gardens, Sassy Baby Products, Bissell Vacuum. Like you could name a bunch of like crazy products I've designed over the years. And then small e-commerce brands as well. So it's just a mix of all those different things get the experience. But what we were was ghost designers. That's what we were labeled as. And so we were called, so no one really knew our name unless you worked on a project with us. Even sometimes the buyers at Costco or Walmart or Target sometimes met us and sometimes didn't. Like they never met us in a Martha Stewart meeting at Staples, but we designed the product. And so those kinds of things got us to realizing that if we were going to move into a world that was very social media driven, and this was about a decade ago, and more people were coming out to being designers in the front, if you want to look at it that way. So in the case of a 3D print world, right, we were going to be the designers that you would hire. They needed to know who we are. So we needed to put our expertise that was behind the scenes and bring it forward. And that's what we did. So we took our expertise that we'd already been using for over a decade in industrial 3D printing, and the mainstream, desktop 3D printers were starting to come into play. And we said, okay, we're going to come out and we're going to do something that puts us and our content and our information and helps people and gets them to be aware of us and our expertise and our brand. And that's when we realized that this was a lot more difficult than it looked. It was going to be a lot of video work. There was no live streaming back then. So we started to look at all of that and said, what's the easiest, fastest way we can do what we want to do? And we said, podcasting, let's try this. And that's what we came out to do. So we put our very first pieces of content were podcasts. However, we did have video because we used to show the 3D printer like time lapse videos of it working. So we always had video component, and we always had a blog because I came out of the blogging world. So I was always blogging before that. So we added the three things together from day one. And that's what we do a little bit differently than everybody else is we take that one piece of content and we spin it off into all the other pieces. So when social media became bigger and bigger over time, we naturally already had the content to use to be successful. We didn't have to think about social media as a separate ideal. We would just do it all as one. So we always start with our voice first.
I love it. I love it. And so what year was this? Just so I get some idea of what technology was available then.
Yeah, this was around 2014 when we started with the podcast and adding it into the mix of things. The blogging we started, the blogging probably started in 2005, 6. So blogging a long time before that. So we, and there were still little bits of video components in and around that whole time, but we didn't really start live streaming until about 2017.
Mhm. I have this thing that happens with a lot of my clients. We create video content, and I remember the first time it happened to me. It's when you meet someone physically for the first time who you don't know who they are, and they say, "Oh my god, I heard you on the podcast, or I saw you on the video. So good to meet you in person." And there's this lag time, right? Do you remember the first time that happened to you where somebody you'd never met said they've been listening to you and they love your show?
Yeah, I do. I really remember I was at an event in Southern California where I live, and it was at one of these kind of like really cool um, auto showrooms, and they offer up and they have these like charity events there. And so I was at a charity event and someone walked up to me and said, "Can I take a picture with you?" He's like, "I've been listening to your podcast and I'm just such a fan." And so he took an Instagram picture with me, and I thought that was like, I was like, I'm not a celebrity. This is just the weirdest thing ever. That's how it felt. But then he started talking to me about all the things he'd been doing because he was listening to my advice, and it felt like the biggest gift.
Tracy, I remember the first time that happened to me. I just started doing this podcast, and I went to San Diego because I live in Tokyo, Japan. And I was checking into my hotel for this conference, and the guy behind me, he goes, "You're Ken Okazaki." I was just like, "Yeah." And you know how it is when you go to a conference, you're like, "I probably met you somewhere, but I have no idea who your name is. So I'm going to play along until the name kicks in." And I was like, and then thankfully he gave me an out. He goes, "No, no, no, we've never met, but I've been listening to your show and I love every single bit of it. Thank you so much. And when that happened, that kind of cemented like, okay, this is working. This is worth continuing, because there's, even though I did make a long-term commitment at the beginning, there was a part of me that's just like, is it worth it? Is it going to work? Is it going to work? Because it's organic. You can't, pay $100 and get 1,000 views the next day. That's not how organic, podcast content works. So for me, when that happened, I was just like, this is what I need to talk about when everybody who I start in content creation is like, you're going to have this moment that's going to happen and it's going to, you're going to feel different when someone recognizes you from your show.
And it's gonna make it worth it, right?
It's a little bit of reassurance, and I remember that did it for me. Now, when you started your podcast, did you like shoot like 20 or 30 or record 20 or 30 episodes and then push out a batch and then go weekly, or did you just start one, two, three in a row and record them as you go?
So we did the advice back then was to do a bunch to launch with. And it was usually the advice was something like a week, like 7 of them or something, do what a month would be. So if we're going to do 4 a month, you do 4 in advance and then you do 1 a week from there. But we were going to do a daily show. 5 days a week. We were going to do a 5-day-a-week show. So we dropped 20 and then we did 5 a week. And so that way we had a bunch of core content already out there ready to go. And then we did 5 a week from then on. And then about after 2 years, we dropped down to 3 times a week and then eventually 2 times a week. And then eventually we just did 1 a week when we hit over 500 episodes. So of that original show, we have 650 episodes before we stopped doing it.
Now, was this just a conversation with you and your partner the whole time?
No, it was a mix of things. So sometimes it was conversation, sometimes it was us being solo. So sometimes he'd do these like Tech Tuesdays and he'd do like these,
Hmm.
real technical tutorial kind of, how
And all by
to's.
voice.
All by voice, yeah. I mean, there was always, like,
Amazing.
the blog component. There was always a
Yeah.
video component so they could go, but you were telling them how to do something. It was like, teaching somebody how to cook without them being able to, see it, smell it, or anything. You have to tell them. You have to be very descriptive, and so we were doing a really good job of that, and then we would have everything would be documented on the blog, and that's what we were driving. So we had so much traffic to our blog. Our blog was outranking everything else, and remember, I had been a blogger and I couldn't get people to read my blog. And now all of a sudden, because we
What
added,
were you blogging out before 3Ds
I was
printing?
blogging about product design. I was blogging about all kinds of things about design and everything like that. And still, we were talking about 3D printing on occasion in the blog. Sustainability. We talked a lot about going green and things like that. And but I couldn't get anybody to read it because there wasn't that sort of driver of new content all the time. But all of a sudden, when we added the podcast component, it just took off, and people would traffic our website was highly ranked, and we kept getting people offering us money to advertise and things like that were going on because of the blog part of it more so than the podcast itself. And that's what people don't really understand when you don't have the video, the audio, and the blog all working together along with your social media, you really don't have a platform that anyone wants to advertise on. They think if they get one of those right, it's enough, and it's just really not in content.
Or it's a bit of a wobbly table,
It
with 2
is.
legs. It may work until it doesn't,
Right,
right?
until the algorithm shifts or something and you don't, yeah, it doesn't
Exactly,
work anymore.
exactly.
So,
And that's what I
yeah.
feel about some of these TikTok stars, They blow up like a beanstalk, and then but you just never know what's gonna just, come along and chop it down.
Well, we've had that happen. So I have over 1,000 clients at Podetize who are doing the done for you service side of things. And many of them who have come to us from having great TikTok, Instagram, or YouTubes, they come to us because they're told by someone that if they don't show that they can take someone off of TikTok and move them into podcasting or move them into their website, then there's no way they're going to get a book deal or a TV deal or any of those other things aren't going to happen if you cannot prove that your audience will transfer. And that's the number one thing that I think most influencers don't understand. That's what it really takes to blow that up. You have to be able to take them somewhere else.
Do you think it was the fact that you started a podcast, or that you started talking about an emerging technology, 3D printing, or was it just a zeitgeist of a combination of those things.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of those things. I absolutely think if I had started it and talked about something completely different, it probably wouldn't worked at the magnitude that it did. And so, but it was the podcast marketplace is much smaller, and that made a big difference. So we could be a big player in a smaller pond on a topic that was emerging and growing.
Got it. Perfect. Now, do you remember the first time that you closed a deal, got a client, as a result of the podcast, where you can like actually draw the line backwards? Like this person started listening to the podcast, and they came to the website and they booked a call. Like when did that happen?
Well, because in our 3D print business, we really didn't work like that. But I could definitely see that has happened so our second podcast was called Product Launch Hazards, and Hazards our last name with two Z's. So we decided to talk all about all things e commerce, product design and development, sourcing in Asia, like all kinds of things like that. And I clearly remember the day where somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, I'd really like you to speak at my conference." And that's really what made the difference for me. There were people who would come through, but more often they just wanted more advice. They didn't really want a full engagement. But whenever I would get offered a speaking engagement and then I would go speak on a stage, I would always close, multi sometimes multi-million dollar contracts, like because we would do contracts that were for a
As a
couple of
designer,
years
you
at
mean?
least. As a designer, yeah, it always happened
Got
that
it.
way. So I can say that, very typically my minimum engagement was about $120,000. So if I got one person from an audience that from a speech, that was the minimum that I would make. And then usually with royalties and other things, I could be close to a million by the time I was done a project with them. And so that happened to me every single time I gave a speech. And every speech I was given came from my podcast.
Okay. And how long did it take until you got booked in a speech from when you started the podcast? Do you remember that?
So actually a lot less the more I went on. So every time I started, so because my 3D print podcast gave us a lot of credibility, when I started the second podcast, it was like a matter of weeks before I would get an offer for a speaking engagement. But when I started the 3D print one, it probably was about 5 months or so before I got my first engagement offering.
Okay, that's good. And the reason I'm asking these questions about timelines is I want to give the listeners this, an image of what reality is versus, what the fairy tale version is, or what some marketer is trying to sell you in their, whatever course they have, right? So,
Oh,
real
I'm
life
so glad
stories.
you said that, Ken.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really critically important. And today it's different. So every year I start a new podcast so I can see how hard it is to duplicate those results. And it is harder today to do what I did in 2014. But it is easier if the rest of your platform is really well built. So if you already have a very good YouTube channel, if you already have a very good website, it's easier to add on a podcast and get results sooner. But what I see pretty consistently is it will take you 25 episodes minimum before the podcast will start paying off in feedback and offers for events or for the next thing somebody might want to partner up with you. And it will also happen that if you don't wait 25 episodes, you won't get the kind of results you want from the listeners either. They won't take action.
Okay. Now, we've gotten to the point where we went from your corporate work to just starting a podcast to now what you're doing, starting a podcast every year and stuff. Tell us a bit about the Podetize business and how that started evolving and into what you do today.
Well, as it goes in anything, when you're doing something and you're kind of at the forefront of it, people are always coming up to you and going, "Oh, I hear this thing about podcasts. Mine's not going as well. What are you doing that I'm not doing?" And then when you tell them, they look at you like you have, an extra head growing out of your shoulders. And they're like, that's way too much work. And so, or I don't want to do that, or I can't do that. I don't have the technical skills, or whatever that is. They look at you like that crazy. But instead, what we had was people started shoving credit cards at us. And they said, "Would you just do that for me? That's exactly what I want." And so we ended up developing this little side business. But my partner and I said, we don't really want to have a service business. We just don't want to have another agency. We don't want to be in that world for long term, but it would be okay if we did it short term to learn something. So we agreed to do it in a very limited way for a very limited set of people. So we took 10 clients on our first year. And we said, okay, we'll only do this for a year. We'll guarantee you we'll do it for a year, but we won't do beyond that unless we're really sure we're going to dive in and do this whole thing. And during that time, our goal was to develop technology. If we could develop some technology to complement the services, then we would continue to do the services for some time. So that's actually what we did. And within a year, we said, okay, we've got this technology, we've got a system, we got a process in place, and we've got a decent team. We can continue to service the service side of it, the agency side of it. And we came up with a pricing plan that helped our agency fund the technology. So we never actually had to take investors either. So the whole thing worked out really well. And so within the second year, those 10 people referred us to, because we never spent a dollar on advertising, referred us to, and we ended up with 100 clients in year two. So we 10x'd our client base just through referral. And then each year we continue to grow, and now we have 1,000. And in this next year, we're going to tip over, and our technology will take over our service business in size.
That's amazing. So when you say the technology business, are you talking about a SaaS or is this something other?
Yeah, so when you have a podcast, you have to syndicate it, right? So you have to syndicate it out, but there's also other things that you might want to do when you're syndicating it. So you want to get it on all the listening apps, but you also want to figure out how to make it rank on those listening apps. And you also might want to mix in calls to action, because remember I said our business is solely focused on professional podcasters with businesses underneath. So we want to make sure they have ways to say, "Hey, I'm offering this webinar," and every one of their listeners can hear that advertisement, that it's not in an old episode and 2 months later that webinar doesn't exist anymore. So we created an ad mixing system, which is a part of our SaaS technology that allows everybody to mix and match ads and do what they want to do from a business promotion standpoint. And you don't have to opt into an ad program that puts irrelevant ads from other people on your show. It's completely in your control. And so that's one of the pieces we built. And then now we're adding even more AI and other things into our SaaS that is coming out in the next year.
Amazing. That's actually, so what you're saying is even if someone's listening to like an older episode, they're going to hear the current ads. And
That's right.
and okay, and that's on any podcast platform that they're listening from?
Yeah, it doesn't matter because it's baked into your episode. So it's actually in the downloads. So it doesn't matter whether someone's streaming your episode or downloading your episode, which matters because some of the players only allow streaming and some of them only allow downloading. So you've got to accommodate both. But what we discovered was about 60% of listens happen on your older episodes. So when somebody comes and finds your show for the first time, they listen to your new episodes, absolutely, but they binge on your older ones if you have that kind of model of useful tactical educational experience that you're sharing with people. They want to get the older episodes. If you're doing a newsworthy, that's why I said we're just not ideal for someone who's doing this sort of like newsworthy, kind of flashy, like whatever's in the news today, it'll be here today, gone tomorrow. We're just not geared for that because we're really geared on those people who are going to binge listen to your entire catalog.
So what you're saying is that I just want to double check this, right? Like right now I use Buzzsprout to syndicate all my stuff. But if I switched over to your platform and I'm about to do a webinar and I want to get, 1,000 registrants, and then that means I could bake the ad into all episodes whenever anybody's listening to them. And then when the campaign's over, they'll be gone. And if they listen to it again afterwards, there wouldn't be an ad in the audio experience. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So you can either swap the audio out for the next new thing that you want to advertise for, or, maybe sometimes you do a special webinar, but then you also want to advertise for your book or your course. You can swap them back and forth, or you can have nothing in an episode. And then the other thing that we built in were a lot more controls. So sometimes we would 3D print on we do our 3D print episodes on some really sensitive subjects like 3D printed guns. And no one wants to put an ad on an episode about 3D printed guns. It's not a great idea. So we can also block episodes from having ads on them, or we can permanently lock an ad in place if somebody said, "Hey, I want to be aligned with this particular piece of content that you want. No matter whenever you do that content, I want the ad space for that." You can lock somebody in and then your ads won't get mixed in there from other people. So we have a
Amazing.
lot of
So
that business style
you're selling me
flexibility
right
for
now
yourself.
without selling me. You're just telling me a story, and I'm just like, That's what I need."
Yeah. But on top of it, what we also added to it was that we have coaching. And that's what we found was the biggest struggle for it. It's like, look, we can have this great SaaS, but if your business doesn't understand how I can use that to my advantage, how can I use it to get more butts and seats for my webinar, right? How can I use it to do that? By making things urgent, relevant, not advertising too far in advance. By being able to do that, you create a different sense of urgency that makes people show up. You also let them know, hey, it's going to be if you want this information now, it's going to be a month before you hear this on the podcast. So, or it's going to be a month before it gets on YouTube. So, this is your only chance to get it. You can really create that sense of urgency. So, by having coaching that goes along with our shows, with our business, and with your syndication, with your SaaS usage, it really has changed people's businesses because they're starting to see, how can I really use the full advantage of what I'm paying for?
Got it. Now, this journey from when you started actually taking on clients for Podetize, how many years are you right now?
So we're officially 5 years, 6 years in the business. We just hit our 6 year anniversary. So 6 years in the business. But we've been podcasting for 9. So from this time we started our first podcast. So it's been an interesting. I love being immersed in the community. So I think that's important.
During that process of building out, your client base and the technology, if you could hit Control Z, or if Mac user Command Z, on anything that happened or that you did, what would that be?
So I mean, look, we're not big on spending marketing dollars. Right? That's not something that we do. We do a lot of organic marketing. It means more to me in terms of, I'm going to say, sustainable growth. I think it has. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of companies, you mentioned Buzzsprout and some of those other companies in the industry who've done a great job of making sure that people know about them. I don't think they have a better product than us in any way, shape, or form, but we haven't done a great job of doing that. And that's on us. But that is also about to change. We treated this as we're going to make sure we've got everything in order, and then we're going to scale really quickly. And so that's where we are. We're right at that tipping point of starting to scale very quickly, and we're going to eclipse a lot of those other companies.
Mm. Do you have by any chance, an affiliate program? So then you could, like any one of your clients, you could say, "Hey, by the way, if you want to earn some commissions, then our ads would run, and if that leads to a sale, you'd earn a commission because you own the platform, you own the technology, and if you advertise yourselves on there, that might be, an easy in if someone doesn't have a high paying sponsor or something, right?"
Yeah, so we chose not to do that for a really specific reason. One is that we want to be the most relevant advertisement to the most relevant audience. That's what we encourage you to do. We want every one of our clients to put only extremely relevant. So if the show was about podcasting for podcasters or something like that, we would absolutely advertise on them. There's no reason we wouldn't create an exchange
You're
with them
right.
and we wouldn't do
Yeah,
that. We
most
already
listeners
do
are
it
not
today.
podcasters, right?
Yeah,
Good
most
one.
of them
That's a
aren't.
good
So
one.
if it's less than 10% of the audience, we wouldn't want you to put our ads on your show because it's distracting. It's distracting from what you have to sell. So we don't really believe in an affiliate model unless there's an absolute audience match. And so then we treat it more like a joint venture. So we do cross promotions. We do much more heavy lifting kind of things where we have them on our show, we go on their show, we do regular webinars together, we do coaching call crashers where they come in and they train our clients and then we share them out immediately. But we do have a referral program for our done for you services. So when a client of ours says, hey, this podcaster needs help with their production side of things, I'm going to refer them over. We give them 5 free episodes of production, which is about $1,000 commission for that goes right into their account. And we've been doing that since the beginning. That's why our referrals are so high, because it's not on the SaaS side, it's on the true production side. So if you meet another podcaster who's got 100 episodes and they're ready to produce more, they already know what they're losing, what they need, what's next for them. They're an easier close for us. And so we can reward that at a higher rate for not having to, go out there and market to them.
You just gave me an idea. I'm gonna steal that.
Good.
No, that
I
makes so
think we
much
have
more
a whole
sense. We'll give
podcast.
you more services.
Yes, right, exactly. So we not only have built our business on that, which is how we doubled each year for 3 years in a row, and now it's scaled off a little bit as you start to once you start to tip over 1,000 clients, it gets harder to do a double in a year. But for us, we did that 3 years in a row. We doubled our size just through referrals. And so the other thing that we do though is we offer packages. And this was a real key for our business and might be for some of you listening out there. We built packages of episodes. So if you bought episode production from us, you could buy 5, 20, 50. You could buy different numbers of episodes. So 50 would be like a whole year's worth of episode production. So you're essentially buying a year and you get the lowest per episode price, but you're prepaying for your entire year. And because they're prepaying, it allowed us to have better cash flow in the beginning of our business and not have to borrow and or go get investors. And so that gave us essentially our clients invested in us and committed to us for a year out. It was amazing. And so we did that, and we probably do about, I would say about a third of our income every year is unused episode production. So it's not even services that have been paid for. They've been paid
So you
for, but
guys
they
are
haven't
pretty
been
much a
used
bank
yet.
as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it really works out well and in our favor for that. But it also does work out for those podcasters because they saved a lot of money per episode than if they were paying it on a monthly basis. And then they can use it whenever they want. So they could take a month off and they didn't pay for a month that they didn't use. They don't lose it.
Okay. Now, I know that you've worked with, hundreds, thousands of, I don't know if thousands, but many hundreds of clients at this point, and you've probably seen repeating patterns, mistakes people make, misconceptions. Let's hit like top three mistakes that people come to you, like they've already started something, and then you got to go in there, get your hands dirty, and help them fix it, or at least point them in the right direction. What are those?
So, the number one thing that I wish I could get across to everyone, and this goes for any type of content you are creating. And I think the influencers in the world have done us a disservice, some of them. It's not about you. If it's not the Tracy show, the Ken show, it's about content capitalist. It's about the audience and what they need to get out of it. And if we approach all of our content from that position, if we approach the creation of our YouTube channel, the creation of the way our website reads, the way our podcast is, the way we name it, the way we describe it, everything is approached from a listener first or viewer first model, we're going to do better in the long run. And what we see significantly here, which is so interesting, is that sometimes we get a show in that was set up in that way. And when we convert them and shift them, the growth in their show is exponential at that point. They cannot believe the growth change that happens for them just by changing that focus. It doesn't mean that we were doing a bad job on the content to begin with. They likely weren't. But everything you were putting out there as your brand was sending the wrong message. Was sending it's all about me and not about you, and there's nothing in it but me selling you something. And that's the number one mistake. The number two mistake is that this is a technical game, right? This is search engine optimization for a podcast directory. You have to play Apple and Spotify's game. And if you don't understand how it technically works, it's as if you were blogging and not understanding search engine optimization, not understanding Google search. It's as if you're YouTubing and you don't understand anything about how to get your video seen amongst the millions of videos viewed every single day, right? You have to understand how the algorithm works. And if you don't, you better work with somebody who does. And that makes all the difference right there. So, those are the two top things that happen. The third thing that I think is really just a mindset issue. It's you think that this is a lot of work and you don't want to put the work in. So if you can't be consistent and constant about something, which is actually a part of the algorithm, meaning if I show up every week for you, not only am I beating the algorithm by doing what I need to do to make sure that it believes I'm reliable, but all of my listeners, all of my clients, all of those people out there, they trust you more because you're holding up to your integrity end of the bargain by showing up for them week after week. It is a part of who I say I'm going to be and how I show up in the world. And if you want to sell coaching, if you want to sell something from your show eventually, then you better show them that you can show up for them. You got to put them first. And so that third thing is the hardest part. They think, I'll just try it for 10 or 11 episodes and I'll see how it goes. It's why we have such a big pod fade quit rate in the industry. It's because they're dabbling in it, they're not committed to it. And in order to first get you to want to be my client, I've got to give to you first. It's got to show a level of benevolence out there and show that I care about you. And showing up is caring.
Amazing, amazing. So all three of those really hit home for me, and I've some of them. Uh, I should rethink how I'm doing stuff, but I've seen the exact same thing in my clients, and I think it's a similar thing with content creation, whether it's podcasting, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are. I'd say those three things are like gold standard foundational things to think about and to apply. Even if it's an email newsletter, it's the same thing. Consistency is
Well,
not about you; it's about the audience. It's in every way of
yeah.
communicating, isn't it?
And this is my advice for most of you out there. Look, there will be people who'll be out there and go, but like Joe Rogan, he calls his the Joe Rogan show. And look, I'm not discounting that model of it, but it costs you more money to do it that way. Or you have to start with a bigger audience and a bigger email list and a bigger influence to do those things. Or on the influencer side, you have to be willing to play the algorithm with no regard for whether or not it meets your individual integrity, meaning whatever the trend is on TikTok, I better go that way and it
Go
doesn't matter
twerk,
what I care what I know
go
about.
show more skin, go do
Yeah,
silly pranks,
exactly.
all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not that it can't be done that way, it's just harder. I think the other way, the way I'm talking about, and is more in integrity, more authentic, and is actually easier to do. You just have to understand that that's what you're doing.
And I also want to address that thing, when you mentioned Joe Rogan, I get that a lot. People are just like, well, Tony Robbins does this, Grant Cardone does this, Gary Vee does this. I'm like, well, how did they start, number one? And also, what was the condition? What was the landscape of content creation when they started? Yeah. So if you answer that, then you'll quickly realize, no, you don't do what they're doing now. You got to figure out what's working today and start building what's appropriate for the stage you're at, which most of the time is consistency and actually giving a crap about what your audience needs.
Yeah, by the time they're selling you something, the gurus out there, they're selling you something, it doesn't work like that anymore. That's exactly what will happen is that it doesn't work like that because they also have the next thing they're gonna sell you and the next thing they're gonna sell you and the next thing they're gonna sell you. That's how it is and in most of that marketplace. So you're missing a piece, you just don't know what it is yet.
Yeah. So give us a walkthrough of what kind of clients that let's just say, uh, that see the most progress. Like I know in my case, like people who are in the coaching industry, they see the most benefit from working with me, right? Then I've got other people. I've got lawyers, I've got dentists, I've got people who are architects, all kinds of industries, and they all do get some benefit, but it's kind of spread out, right, a little bit. But then business coaches, people who coach people to scale their businesses, that they skyrocket. In your case, are you seeing a certain industry that really shines compared to the rest, or there's a larger portion of them?
Yeah, I mean, we happen to have a large portion of real estate and financial managers and other things in that sort of niche of area, but we have equal amount of probably of health and wellness coaches, for instance, and so it all balances out for us. But if they're not focused on selling their own business stuff of some kind, whether it's a book, a course, a mastermind, it could be any or consulting services, any kind of those things, then they're really not ideal for what we do because the kind of advice we give just doesn't fit that model of
Seems
business
like
that they would be
services
in
is kind of
otherwise.
the common theme among your
Yeah,
client
it
base. Is that
really
right?
is. Yeah, I mean, we do have some pre e-commerce companies and other things, but they're building up brand awareness, not just single product awareness. So they might be an expert in, fitness equipment, and they are selling the on the podcast. They're really talking about their expertise in fitness, how you stay fit, and other things. And the fitness equipment selling is on the side of that, but it shows a commitment to the marketplace, and so that's where we really kind of fall in the realm of things. What I think really happens at the end of the day with brands and businesses and coaches and that kind of model of people is though this awareness that The content isn't about selling it in and of itself. It's about selling who I am, what I can do, what we bring to the world as a brand, all of that. It's a bigger picture look at that than it is a micro look at, oh, I just got to sell this single product or this single service or this single thing. That's what a webinar is for. That's what a sales, email is for, right? It's a different model. Content creation is not about that. It's service.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, we're coming close to the end, and I know toward the end, we usually like to talk a little bit about what's coming next. And you spilled the beans a little bit. You got this technology, the podcast, and you're, you know, expanding that part. Could you tell us a bit more about how that's going to look, let's say 2 or 3 years from now?
Well, look, there's no secret that AI is emerging in a lot of technology businesses, but we've been using AI for over 3 years now. So it's been behind the
There needs to be
scenes
a
as a
safe
major
word.
part.
I think there needs to
Yeah,
be a safe
there's
word, like
does.
Tracy, pineapple, pineapple pudding, and then like
Yeah.
wink, like, are you
We can
AI
talk
or
about
something?
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Right.
I
Are
don't
you
know if I'm
real or
talking to
are you
AI
not?
anymore because it's so real. I mean, I do know this is you,
Right.
but in some cases, we won't be able to tell. It's getting too good. And
I
I know there was one guy. What's his name? Frank Kern. OG marketer, right? You heard of him, right?
Yep.
He just put out an ad, and he's talking, and then it says, "Hi, this is Frank Kern." Actually, it's not Frank Kern. I am AI. Frank Kern just told me to paste my voice. Frank, no. So AI wrote the script, dubbed the voice, did deep fake on his face, and he called himself out on it. And I was looking, I was like, wow, is this really where it's going? And he did it in a jocular manner, but I think in a couple years we won't be able to tell the difference.
I think on video it's going to be harder. Okay, it is going to be harder for us to tell the difference on video. Because video is already pixelated, if you wanna think about it. It's compressed, it's as good as the phone I'm watching it on, right, So it already has a lot of compressions and filters and other things that run over the top of it that it gets harder for us to tell. Plus, most people actually don't really listen they don't really watch the video. They listen, they don't watch. But when you do voice, there is a significant, I'm going to call it ROI difference, right? There's a return on investment difference. If I don't show up personally, my voice doesn't resonate. So we had a client who doing a podcast completely separate, but they ran a whole series of, and I want to say it's like 40 or 50 different weekly lessons that they do that are really short. They're like 5-minute lessons. And originally the owner had recorded them all in his voice and he had them all, and someone convinced them to have them done in an artificial voice. So it was a voice, a transcript to voice thing before AI even came in. And he did that because he thought he wanted to take his energy out of it. He wanted it to not be all about him, and that was his model for it. What they found was people didn't absorb the lesson at all. That they tuned it out because it wasn't a human. There was no
There's no
emotion in
feeling,
it.
right?
There's no
That's
feeling, and they didn't get it, and they would be like, "Oh, okay, whatever." And so the results from those lessons didn't happen in the next year when they had done it with the fake voices. So we do know our ears are very sensitive to, is this really a person? And honestly, on the back end, we can see it in the sound wave. So there really isn't as easy a way to fake the sound wave as there is. So in our AI experience over the years, we actually have come up with what I'm going to call it a voice print, like a fingerprint. So I know Ken's fingerprint of voice. And if it didn't match, I could alert him that there's a deep fake on the podcast about him. I could do it. We can have the alert system set. We don't have it set, but we could. And it's just easier to detect there, much harder for it to fake it. And that's because it's too filtered, too patterned. We already hear today from some people who use the auto filtering systems instead of real audio editing, when they just use the filter systems and they remove the ums and the ahs and removes all the awkward pauses and takes all of that out, that those podcasts don't get the same listen through rate that one that was never edited to begin with.
okay. Note to my editors: don't cut this one up. We're just gonna
Yeah,
run it raw.
don't
with all the
overcut. You know
outtakes and
what?
everything.
That's what I hear. Don't overcut, because when you do overfilter and you overcut, I mean, you should cut for content. You should cut for
I
when we
say
talk over
way too
each
many
other.
times in my videos, though. When I listen
But
back, I just said it again, didn't I?
I do too. I say so before each
When I read the
section.
transcript and then I actually run a search, like the word and there's like 50, I'm just like, no way. And I don't realize how much I say it until I see it. And then I'm like, cut it all
But
out. But you're saying that people actually retain longer if you leave some of those.
well, yeah, you don't want to take it all out. Yeah, you do. Look, if you're doing something really repetitive and annoying, definitely take it out. If the sound levels are annoying, fix them. Like, there's no questions about like those things you should do. But don't take out it when I pause and then I continue on. There's a dramaticness about that that makes a difference in how you receive the information that's coming.
Well, my editors are going to be listening to this, and I hope that they're going to take this actually as direct instruction from somebody who's done a whole lot more podcasts than I have and has seen a lot of results with that.
Yeah, it's
Thank you
just
for
one of
that.
those things. But you were asking before about the AI, and I think the AI on podcasting is really going to solve a lot of those technical problems we were talking about before. The is my title really optimized right? Is do I have a complete description? What else should I add? Can I make my call to action more impactful? How can I, what's the best video clip to share of my show to get somebody to listen to the whole episode? We don't ask the right question. We clip what we think is the most interesting part about the episode, and we don't think about clipping what's most interesting to someone who knows nothing about what it is we're talking about. What would intrigue them to listen to the entire episode? That's what needs to be clipped. And if somebody else, if an AI says, here's my audience profile, and you give that to the AI, here's the audience profile, here's the content, you tell me which 5 clips are the best one. Now you're going to be in a better place because it's going to be from that outside perspective. Now, you'll still look at it and go, are they good? Are they really not representative of who I am, what my brand is? Let me work towards that, and it'll get better and it'll learn. That's the artificial intelligence part, right? It'll learn and it'll get better at that over time. So that's our goal, is to integrate that sort of promotion side and that technical side so that you don't need to pay my services anymore. My goal is to make sure that 90% of my services are obsolete within 2 years, so that you can just pay $99 on my platform, use everything we have to do, and you'll never have to hire me unless you want to do some advanced
And you'll
video
just be
editing,
working on the
audio editing.
technology to make sure it's
Yeah, and we'll just
updated,
keep working on
relevant. And
that.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
then you'll be, like Facebook and Google pretty much.
But we wouldn't know what to do if we hadn't have spent the last 6 years editing for people and understanding what's so hard for that. And I think that that's the mistakes. Too many people are trying to just go straight into like, oh, I got to make something with artificial intelligence. I got to make something with technology. And at the end of the day, it's not as useful to the user, as it doesn't solve their goal. It solves maybe one part of the goal, but it doesn't solve their overall ease of use, their absolute technical goals, and it's not going to get the results that they want. And then the next side of things that are coming for us is advertising, because you mentioned it. Look, some people do want to take money up for their show. They want to offset the cost of it. They want to take advertisers. And we want to make sure that you don't make a mistake doing that. We want to make sure that it's relevant advertising. And so that's what we were really working on. We've been working on a deal for over a year now, and it's really starting to come out of beta and into full use. And by the time, I don't know, maybe by the time this airs, it'll actually be in full use, but it'll be pretty close. And what we're doing is really making more relevant connections between advertisers and podcasts based on your content topics, based on your audience matches, and not based on how many downloads you have, because it doesn't really matter. Because if someone wants to talk about content production and they want your show, they don't care whether you have 100 listeners or 100,000 listeners who don't take action. They want the 100 listeners who are going to take action. So that's what we really want, is that good match.
Perfect. Now, our everything you're saying is amazing. You got to first of all, where can people sign up or be interviewed to work with you? And my listeners, I think they'd be very interested. A lot of them. I mean, this whole thing is about content creation. You're about content creation. Where can they pick up some information about you?
So we're everywhere on social media and on the internet at podetize.com. It's super easy to find us. And it's like monetize with pod at the beginning, right? Like that's the model of it. That's how we came up with the name. So Podetize is just the easy way to do it. But look, we also want you to remember that we know sometimes you're not ready to pay us. You're not ready to buy those services. We have free boot camps and free content. Go check out our podcasts first. And so that's why we put our podcasts out there front and center first. The Binge Factor and Feed Your Brand are our two podcasts for podcasters. So the Binge Factor are interviews and success tips from people who I've met who've usually done 50 to 100 episodes or more. And Ken's going to be on my show next. So there's going to be a nice reciprocal there. So I always have people, right? I always love to do an exchange because it's more valuable. Our audiences are matched and they do want to hear your expertise and what you're doing and what you're trying in your show because your perspective is different. So that's what the Binge Factor is all about. And Feed Your Brand, we actually live stream that.
And I'm betting I'm going to be your first Japanese guest in Japan.
I think you probably are the one. Yeah, the first one from Japan, that's for sure. I guarantee that. I think, yeah, definitely. Even maybe my only second Japanese one overall. So, but the first one from Japan, and but yeah, Feed Your Brand is we live stream every week. So when we do our coaching call, we actually live stream those tactics out on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. So we're on all those places and we live stream our weekly coaching call. And so that tip of the week, you could get it before anyone hears it on the podcast, but you can also get it on the podcast too.
Okay, that's amazing. So, guys, I'm going to put all the links that she just mentioned there, basically starting from podetize.com, all her socials. Go down to the show notes if you're listening on the podcast, or if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to check out the description. Now, before I wrap this up, because I know we're running out of time here, what advice do you have for someone who, and this is actually going to be relevant to both of us, somebody who's thinking about starting content creation or has already started, but they're overwhelmed with all the stuff, right? At what point does it make sense? And do you advise your potential people, prospects, to actually hire an agency versus do it yourself versus hire, some staff, some virtual assistants or in-house assistants? How do you help people make that decision?
What I'm going to encourage you to do is find a place where you can experiment. Because if you don't like it, if you don't like creating content, then there is no amount of money that is going to get you to show up. The number one thing I can't make my clients do is show up and record, right? I can't make them record. So do something consistently every single week for a while, like live stream. Just do a simple live stream. Doesn't have to be long. Do 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Go out there and talk to an audience. Make sure you want to get behind this mic every single week. And if you can do that and you think, gosh, I love this. This is really great. Now I'd like to take it to the next level. What that level is for you is the determination, right? Do you not feel technically savvy and you need help? Do you really want high production value? Do you want, you'll know more after you experiment and do that. But if you cannot show up behind this mic, don't spend the money before. It's not going to make you do it any better. Like that, I can tell you that it doesn't matter if my clients spend $100 or $1,000. They're not going to get behind that mic if they don't like it.
Totally makes sense.
And so, thinking that the more I put in, the more committed I'll be to it is not a good strategy. Make sure you're ready for it.
All right. You heard it, guys. Go just do it. Try it. See if you like it. And if you do and you need help, then go check out the links below. Check out Tracy Hazzard. Tracy, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. And if I'm honest, I think that this was probably the most one of the podcasts where I feel I was asking questions directly for myself more than for my audience. And you're literally doing exactly what you said: is make all your podcasts about the listener, not about yourself. And you did such an amazing job. So I want to just acknowledge you for that, because I was feeling it the whole time. Thank you so much. Any last words of advice you have for content creators, podcasters in general before we sign off?
Look, if you're out there and you are already creating content, Give yourself a pat on the back right now because you are a step up from so many people. There are not enough consistent content creators out there, and that puts you in a class on your own. So go get some help and get some. We call them appraisals in our marketplace. Like if you want to go and get a podcast appraisal and see how your podcast is doing, we'll take a look at it. But go out there and get somebody who knows what they're doing. Get Ken to look at your videos. Like, go out there and get somebody to look at what you're doing and give you the next nudge. You do not have to be perfect. Content creation is a practice, right? And each week I'm going to get better and better. And if I can make a tiny little nudge to making an improvement, my show will be so amazing in a year that I will see the return on that result. So, being open to getting help, please go out there and do that. There's so many people like Ken out there putting out their shows, giving you advice. Go listen to it.
And I'm going to agree with that 100%. And something just stood out to me when you said the next nudge. I think that could be the name of a podcast show. Welcome to the next nudge.
It should be.
It could be. All right, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. And the fact that you listened to the end tells me there was something special about our conversation with Tracy that was really valuable to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have spent an hour with us. So go ahead, give us a rating, whatever stars that's going to be. Also, make sure you share this with somebody who you think is going to find this valuable. Until next time, uh, that's it.